Video, I'm going to explain the basics of functions in Python. So first off, let's start with the simplest type of function, a lambda function. Let's define f as a lambda function which takes a single input x and just returns x multiplied by 2. So if we evaluate f at 2.0, we get 4 out, 3, we get 6, and so on. So lambda is a keyword that explains that what's coming next is going to be an anonymous function. Colon is the next keyword. Everything before the colon is the inputs. So this one just takes one input x, and here's the statement that the function computes, and the return value for this will be the return value of the function. If we want two inputs, say we want an extra input, then we have to now write 2 before the colon and separate it by commas. And as you can see now, it will no longer accept a single input, so we can just add one more. And now we have 2 times 3 times 2, which is 12. So that's a lambda function. If we have something more involved, we may want to define the function fully. And for that, we use the keyword def and then colon, and then everything hereafter should be inlined. And here we can create variables like, let's call it tmp equal to x times 2, and then return tmp. Return is another keyword. So let's suppose first that we've got the return statement, then fct of 2 does nothing. And we can see that actually there's no tmp in memory. We forgot to write return tmp. Now we get 4 out. But tmp is not defined, and that's because tmp is only defined in what's called the local scope of this function. So it only exists while this function is running. And and we can add multiple inputs here by also giving it y, like so. Now a function will require 2 inputs, but still only returns a single number. And again, here oops, I actually had something in memory from earlier. I can see. Let's just restart my kernel here and rerun everything. What you will see now is that there's no y in memory. Also, y is not a variable that's been defined in outside scope. It's just the name of the input here, and it's I can refer to it with the symbol y in here, but outside of the function scope it doesn't exist. So final thing that's important to note regarding function scope is if I define z out here to be 3, so now you can see z is in memory, I can actually work with it in here. Now we're adding 3 to the number from before. And z is can be seen from inside the function at whatever value it was when the function was defined. So if I now set z equal to 4 and I call my function again, it's actually changing what's going on inside the function, because z is still pointing. It's pointing to the address of whatever z is. So that is changing out here, even though z is not formally an input. So what that means is that it's a little bit dangerous to be accessing variables that are in kind of just in general memory scope. Really what you should be doing then is you should be giving it as an input, so that you are asking your user to explicitly provide z as an input to the function. Otherwise, sometimes you can have z defined up here, and then you define your function, and then later you change z, and unwillingly you may be then changing what's going on inside of your function. So just a little note of caution to make sure to explicitly state what you want to give as inputs to the function, rather than to be accessing them from the general memory scope. Okay. The third way that we can access functions is by putting them into separate modules, and we do that by creating a new file. Oops, not like this. So let's add a. Let's actually not do it in here then. So we switch outside here, and here's the folder that I'm currently in, and then I'm going to add a new file outside, and I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code to do that editing. All right. So let's call it. We call it wherever we want. Let's call it helper, because it's going to contain our helper functions. And in this Python module that we will be importing, we need to import the same modules that we want the functions to be using. So let's just let's start by just importing NumPy, and then let's suppose that we want to put our function from before into that script. So we want to take this function or something similar. Let's write a new one actually. Let's call it fun, and it takes a single input x, and then it returns x times 3. Okay, how do we access it then? Well, now we need to import our helper module. Let's reload everything just to be sure. And then we can try to exit helper.fun, and voila, we're calling our function from inside helper. It's important to note that this little bit of code does a lot of extra work for us. So let's start by not having that included, which is not generally recommended, and then restarting our notebook, and then let's say that we run our function, and then we go in here and want to change it. We want to have it multiply by 4 instead. I save it, and then I go back out here and I run this cell again. It's not changing because MATLAB imported helper already, so it hasn't seen that it's updated. And sometimes, yeah, and also now, even when I run it again, it's not seeing that I've changed this function. If I restart my kernel and I run things, then it rereads it. But if then every time I make small changes in here as I'm developing the code, you can see, I need to restart my notebook in order to see these changes. So this little piece of code here, Autoreload, it's telling, by giving it the parameter Autoreload2, it's telling Python to always be reloading everything. Every time you run a cell, it reloads all modules, which is going to slow things down considerably. But let's see what's happening now. Let's change it back to 3, and we run the cell, and then it's changing. So this little bit auto reload here is helping us to ensure that the functions that we put inside of our helper module are actually being reread and updated. All right, and let's just make sure that we completely understand how to use these modules. Let's have a second function that we call not fun, and it takes a single argument. Let's call it z, and it does some calculations, computes some local value y, which is z times 2, and then it returns the square root of y, just to make things fun and interesting. So now what we can see is helper.notFun of. Alright, so it's multiplying by 2 and taking the square root. That gives us 2 back out. But if we take 3, then we're getting some weird number back out. Alright, let's suppose that we want to, instead of this first step, we want to use fun of x. Now we're telling it to use this function fun, which we defined up here. So it starts by multiplying by 3. Let's do 2 so we can compare it. And let's see what happens. Oops, I need to use set obviously as the input here. Alright, so this works as well. So now our not fun function is calling fun, and note that we are not writing helper.fun in here, or helper.fun, because we are already inside the class file. Out here in your notebook, you have to tell Python to access helper and find the function inside that module. But when you're writing code inside the module, you just access it directly as something that is here. And that is basics of how to put functions into modules and access them. And so I hope you find this helpful.